With some new familiar faces, the New York Knicks enter a new season with their highest expectations in years, and with even stiffer competition in the Eastern Conference. They can get off to a good start in Game 1 tonight as they host a team certainly in the mix in the East, the Boston Celtics. What's up, people? Welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley opening night preview. I'm Chris Williamson alongside SNY NBA insider Ian Begley. We're really happy to welcome back two familiar faces here on the Putback. Ryan McDonough, the former GM of the Suns and spent 10 years in the Celtics front office. He's now an insider for Odyssey Sports. And of course, the CEO and creator of Knicks Fan TV, Casey Powell. We are live on SNY's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages, as well as streaming on SNY.TV. As always, you can get involved in the comments section throughout this entire stream. But as always, we're going to tip things off with the baseline. So, Ian, defying expectations entering last season, the Knicks made the playoffs for the first time since 2013 without any major front office or coaching changes. Leon Rose returned most of the pieces from last year's team while adding, two experienced shooters in Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker. And what was there really a drama-free offseason, which I can't believe I'm saying that about the Knicks. Give us one or two major storylines heading into tonight's opener.
Yeah, you're looking at the center position for the Knicks because you're not going to have Nerlens Noel. So it's going to be a combination of Taj Gibson and Mitchell Robinson. For Robinson, he played his first game in 7 months last Friday. So conditioning is going to be an issue. You don't know how long he's going to be able to play. So you're going to lean on Gibson, maybe even some Jericho Sims. And then you're looking at Kemba Walker's debut as a Knick. Special for him for several reasons. One, obviously, he's a New Yorker, has a lot of fond memories at the Garden from playing at UConn and the NBA and Rice High School. And he also said yesterday that it's significant for him to play the Celtics. It does mean something. This is his old team, and it would be nice to get a win against Boston. So the Kemba Walker debut, what happens at the 5 spot, those are a couple of things I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, he could really be a game changer for this team, especially at the point guard position, because they've had so many holes and weaknesses at that spot. Now, CP, according to Vegas, the Knicks over-under for wins is set at 42.5. Last year's pre total was almost half of that. Yeah. What's your excitement level entering this year, man?
Super excited, Chris. I mean, last year I pegged the team at 26 wins, and I was way off by about 15 games. The fan base got on me for it. We've been feeling the energy around this fan base, around this team since Summer League, honestly. Since we drafted Grimes, McBride, and Sims, this fan base has been, they've been on this team, and they're ready to roll. And straight through the preseason, they feel the chemistry that this team has. They feel like there is going to be a carryover and not a fall off from last year based on the acquisitions that we made, especially in Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. So I'm going with 46 wins. We have a lot of fans in the fan base going with 50, 55 wins. I'm going to keep it fairly conservative. I still have Knicks fan PTSD to some extent. So I'll go 46, but there's no doubt there's an electricity around this team and the fan base right now.
Oh, absolutely. And the NBA is always better for it when the Knicks are competitive in the league. And Ryan, we'll get into, Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier specifically in a bit. But on the whole, what did you make of the moves that Leon Rose and company made this offseason?
Yeah, Chris, always great to be on with you guys. I'll answer that two ways. Initially, I didn't really like what I thought the Knicks were doing. They went out and signed Evan Fournier. They re-signed Alec Burks, Nerlens Noel. So initially, my reaction was negative. But then as I learned more about the contracts, they do have team options on the back end of those deals. It made more sense. And then the offseason really shifted for me to the positive when two things happened. First, they re-signed Julius Randle. I thought that contract extension, getting him locked in, not letting him hit unrestricted free agency. Looking ahead to 2022, guys, it's a weak free agent class next offseason, so you did not want to get in a bidding war with Randle, who would have been an unrestricted free agent, and you potentially could have lost him for nothing. So I really like that. And then a player that Chris and CP referred to, Kemba Walker, that's found money for me. I mean, getting a guy like that, he was a max player just a couple of years ago. It's only a few off seasons ago he signed that max deal with Boston. Obviously, injuries have played a factor, but for the Knicks, that was a steal. We'll see how much Walker can give them. We'll see if he's able to stay in the lineup consistently. But either way, at that price, it's something they had to do. So again, I started negative. I finished positive on the Knicks offseason. But keep in mind, guys, so much of this league is about expectations. As CP mentioned, last year expectations were low. The Knicks exceeded that. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of my first year going into my second year as GM of the Phoenix Suns. When you have a year that blows expectations out of the water that much, it's difficult to sustain that level or take it to the next level. That'll be the challenge for the New York Knicks.
Absolutely. But Julius Randle and the team are already, they've already flushed out last year. They said that was last year. We're focused on this year. So we'll see how hungry they are, to exceed expectations this year. And once again, write your questions into the comment section, no matter what platform you're watching on. We'll get to them throughout the show. And Ryan brought up, Julius Randle CP. He's back with the Knicks after an incredible regular season, but a disappointing first round series against the Hawks. Can Randle replicate the success he had last year? I mean, he did double his assists per game from the previous year.
I mean, it was an historic year for him when you look at career highs across the board, Chris. 24 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, 7 assists per game. Julius Randle was every bit of a playmaker as, the average point guard in the league. He made this team that much better. So I do think he'll be able to carry it forward. The numbers may not be as high because he now has help. He has Kemba Walker here. He has Evan Fournier here. Those are guys that will be expected to play make and create their own shot as well. So maybe the numbers go down a little bit, but the one thing about Julius Randle is that every year he works on his game, he works on his body, and he's dedicated. We had Meta World Peace on it, and he spoke about how Julius Randle really looked up to Meta World Peace and Kobe and their work ethic and how they trained with the Lakers. And so you see that dedication. As Ryan said, he signed the extension early with the team, giving them some cap flexibility. He's locked in with the front office, locked in with Coach Tom Thibodeau. He believes in them. So I think we will continue to see a most improved player track for Julius Randle. Now, the question becomes the playoffs, because after all the good that he did last year, the fan base has recency bias, and, the no-show in the playoffs certainly is, evident with them. But I think with the help now, I hope that the new acquisitions will help get Julius Randle some easier shots, and it won't just be an isolation shot diet for Julius Randle. Trust the help. Hopefully a little two-man game with Evan Fournier, Kemba Walker, RJ Barrett, Derrick Rose, with all those playmakers. I think he'll be better for it.
Yeah, I think he'll feel less pressure, to do it all. Right. Especially last year, he was somebody who probably felt that he needed to, be the guy to do everything, and that just wasn't going to happen against the Hawks with the way he played. Now, Ian, meanwhile, there are a lot of expectations surrounding RJ Barrett in the league that he can make this upcoming season. What kind of roles does he need to fill on this Knicks squad in his third season?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about his offense and the way he shot the ball for most of last season. For me, I'm looking at the other end of the floor because Barrett may take on that Reggie Bullock role from last season. Bullock often defended the top wing on the opponent's side. So Bullock's gone. He's in Dallas. The Knicks need someone to fill that role. I think you'll see Barrett in there a bunch, especially early on. And he said that, he put on some added muscle in the offseason, a few pounds to get prepared for that, to get his body ready to take on that role. Tom Thibodeau, hasn't revealed whether that will be Barrett night in and night out or somebody else, but he did say in general, Barrett has definitely improved defensively. He's seen it from the summer, from the preseason, from training camp. He sees Barrett as somebody who can guard 2 to 4 and maybe even some point guard. So Barrett's defense is going to be key this season for the Knicks. We think they're going to take a step back a little bit because of the personnel moves, but they don't want to fall too far back on the defensive end. So Barrett's going to be big there.
Yeah, especially because, that's Tibbs' identity. His philosophy is, revolving around defense and being a hard-nosed team. And Ryan, we talked about, Kemba Walker earlier, the Bronx native, a UConn product, former first-round pick. And you saw Kemba up close in Boston the last 2 seasons. What kind of player are the Knicks getting in Kemba at this stage in his career? Because he might not be that max guy anymore.
I'll be interested to see, Chris. I don't know the answer to that, even though I've watched Kemba closely when he was in Charlotte, carrying the Hornets franchise. And then he got off to a good start a few years ago with the Celtics. That knee, his left knee, did give him some issues. I think that was a big part of the reason for the trade from Boston to Oklahoma City with Al Horford coming back. The Celtics had to throw in their first-round pick in that deal. So I'll be interested to see how he holds up over the course of 82 games. Keep in mind that for the first time in a long time, we're back on schedule now. It was another shortened offseason. But that was something that when you talk to the folks in Boston last year, they thought really hurt Kemba Walker, not only having the quick turnaround coming out of the Orlando bubble, scheduled, but they thought the season was going to start sometime in 2021, maybe around MLK Day. As you remember, it started December 22nd, which I think really disadvantaged the Celtics and Walker individually. I think it also, in the Western Conference, hurt Dallas with Kristaps Porzingis because those guys had offseason procedures. And I preface it this way, Chris, because now Kemba's had a full offseason. He's been traded. He's somewhere he wants to be. He's gone through preseason and training camp now with the team, and he has some talent around him. And the guys you just mentioned, Fournier and Randle. So I'll be interested to see. I wouldn't expect him to play 75 or 80 games, but I think if he plays close to 70 at a relatively high level, again, that's found money for the New York Knicks, and he's what they need, another shot creator to go alongside Julius Randle.
And Kemba, he said all along since he's been here that for him, coming to New York was in part about a team that wanted him. The Knicks showed him that they really wanted him after things didn't work out in Boston, and that mattered to him. And so it kind of ties into this family atmosphere that the Knicks have started to build with Tom Thibodeau, Leon Rose, Scott Perry, William Wesley, and everyone else. There's a lot of talk about culture and holding yourself to a high standard and being focused day in and day out. It's so much of it gets thrown out there, Ryan, in kind of the public discourse, but you know what culture looks like because you've seen it from your seat, from looking at the Knicks from afar. Do you see them starting to create that winning culture with this group?
Well, I think they were helped with what they did this offseason. What I mean by that is they gave the guys multi-year deals. There were a lot of short-term deals. That was something that Scott Perry and Steve Mills did a nice job of when they did the short-term deals. They gave the franchise flexibility, and the players played very well last year. I mean, as CP mentioned, as you guys know, they blew the preseason win total out of the water. In fact, I think they probably hit the over more significantly than any team in the league, just in terms of how good they were relative to expectations. So I bring it up because there aren't any excuses, right? Like now that the players, they've had success. They've gotten paid. They have some continuity. Even the guys who were free agents that people, myself included, initially thought maybe a slight overpay before we knew about some of the team options with Evan Fournier and Alec Burks, Derrick Rose, Nerlens Noel. So I bring it up because I do think that buy-in will be there. I think that continuity will be there. But as you guys have pointed out, the personnel is a little different. That's Tibbs' identity. It's hard to grind out wins defensively 82 games a year. So the challenge for me, when I look at this team is, can they be good enough defensively? Because they're going to be better offensively, I think, with the year in the system and more offensive talent with Fournier and Walker coming in. But can they sustain a relatively high defensive level? And can the other guys make up for some of the defensive shortcomings of a guy like Kemba Walker? Fournier struggles then at times. Can the complement of their parts bring him to what CP was referring to earlier, 45 to 50 wins, and maybe put him in the mix for home court advantage in the Eastern Conference playoffs?
Yeah, and as you're counting down the minutes to tip off, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to visit SNY.TV for plenty of Knicks coverage, including Julius Randle's anticipation of chaos from fans at the Garden, as well as an Atlantic Division preview, and of course, plenty of coverage from Ian Begley. And Ian, looking at tonight, a friend of the show, Nerlens Noel, is doubtful against the Celtics as he continues to deal with some knee soreness. Mitchell Robinson could start at center after seeing action in the final preseason game when he logged almost about 27 minutes with some 9.6 boards. What are the expectations for Mitchell Robinson early this season, I should say?
Yeah, I think the Knicks just want to see him on the court for an extended period of time. Chris, you go back to March when he got hurt again. The Knicks looked at kind of March to the rest of the regular season as an opportunity to look at Robinson as their starting center and see how he reacted to that position, really opportunity to evaluate him. So when he hurt his foot, it took that opportunity for evaluation away. And Robinson's entering an interesting point in his career because the Knicks could offer him an extension in season. If not, he'll be an unrestricted free agent this year. I think the Knicks are going to take a wait and see approach on any extension talks with Robinson. They want to see him on the court for a long stretch. They want to see how he produces, but they've been so positive about the way Robinson has approached his rehab with his foot. I think there was a setback in there somewhere, but Robinson weathered the storm. He got back on the court, and Tom Thibodeau has really, really, really sung Robinson's praises for his approach with rehab and the way he's matured really as a professional approaching his craft.
Yeah, and if they can just keep him healthy for like 75% of the season, that'll make them such a much more dynamic team, and especially on the defensive end. And CP, after Friday's preseason action, Mitch actually said himself that he needs to get his conditioning back up. Are you concerned about him after he admitted that, or do you think he'll get back on track rather quickly?
Well, as Tom Thibodeau said, he wanted to get Mitch's feet wet and ended up playing him 27 minutes. So clearly, Tom Thibodeau wants to put Mitch on the fast track, especially with Nerlens Noel being out and injured. But no, I'm not worried about Mitch's conditioning. He's a young guy. He's ready to go. And I think, yeah, it'll take him some time to get up to game shape. But again, as a young player, I think he'll be fine. And we saw some good things in that preseason finale against the Wizards. We saw him get on the offensive glass. That's an area where the Knicks will really need him. Got a nice little strong putback. He had a steal, a couple block shots, and also intimidated shots. You know, that's an area where Mitch's presence is certainly felt in the court. May not always show up on the stat sheet, but as a guy that makes offending guards and wing players think twice before they come into the lane on him or make an extra pass, you know, Mitch's presence will definitely be felt. So looking forward to seeing him out there. And he's got a tough matchup against Robert Williams of the Celtics. So looking forward to seeing those two guys go at it tonight.
Yeah, he absolutely is going to have his work cut out for him. And Ryan, as we know, Mitchell Robinson is in the final year of his rookie contract. What kind of options could be on the table for Robinson this coming year or after, you know, going into the offseason 2022? And what could that deal look like if he has a productive season?
Yeah, as Ian mentioned, he is eligible, will be eligible for an extension in season this year. So the Knicks have an advantage there. It's a relatively weak free agent class next year in 2022, as I mentioned. So Robinson, depending on really for me, two things. First and foremost, can he stay healthy? And then secondarily, if he is healthy in the lineup, can he stay out of foul trouble? I think that's what people want to see from Mitchell Robinson. We know his length, athleticism, shot blocking ability are all, you know, potentially elite if he's able to stay on the court. So I think he's slot in the top tier of centers in free agency if the Knicks do not extend them. I think Deandre Ayton, who did not get an extension from the Suns, is clearly at the top of that list for me, but Mitch is probably right behind him in that group there. And again, it's a weak free agent class, which could benefit a guy like Mitchell Robinson. The Knicks, as we discussed, have a history, at least since Leon Rose has arrived, of taking care of their own guys who have produced. So I wouldn't be surprised if in season, if he produces, the Knicks extend him then, if they see it for maybe a third half of the year or more. As far as numbers, I'm not really sure. I mean, I'd look down in Orlando. Wendell Carter Jr. got, I think, $50 million a year over 4 years, 12.5 a year. Keep in mind, guys, one thing that's generating a lot of discussion right now around the NBA, especially with front offices and agents, is the potential new media deal coming in right around 2024, 25 in that range there. So what teams are banking on, especially with a talented young player like a Wendell Carter Jr. or maybe a Mitchell Robinson, or maybe hasn't fully put it together yet, is that if they lock that player in long term, the guy plays relatively well and the cap spikes, well, those contracts may look more like the mid-level deals. In fact, they may actually be mid-level deals as the money appreciates. So that's something to keep an eye on. But I think you guys hit the nail on the head. The Knicks want to see him healthy. They want to see him produce. And I think if that happens, my guess would be they do not let him get on the unrestricted free agent market in 2022.
Yeah, Ryan, you mentioned the TV deal that could be coming and how the cap may increase again. So then you look at Nerlens Noel, the Knicks gave him a $30 million deal. And then you would think, hey, maybe they're not looking to invest that much into Mitchell Robinson. But if you give Mitchell Robinson a fair market value contract and that cap goes up, it's not going to look like a foolish move at all because you're going to have more space there. With Ayton, do you think that there's any scenario where he doesn't end up back in Phoenix despite everything that happened around the negotiations? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that the earliest he really could leave, Ian, is 2023, the 2023 offseason. The way to do that would be, since he is going into restricted free agency in 2022, if he doesn't get an offer sheet from another team that he likes, he does have the ability to sign the qualifying offer. Since he was the -- 1 pick and, you know, is produced, he'll meet the starter criteria and all that, his number is going to be high. So the qualifying offer, you know, I think 16, 17 million for 1 year, then he'd be unrestricted. So I think it's too soon to say. I mean, right now there is obviously some tension and friction in Phoenix between Ayton and the Suns franchise. There's nothing they can do about it now until after July 1 next summer in 2022. So I think he'll be at the top of that free agent list. But realistically, guys, the team has a big advantage in restricted free agency. And anytime players don't reach a deal like Deandre Ayton, like Colin Sexton and others in the 2018 draft class, again, the team has an advantage next year. But, you know, historically, we've seen some things happen. I mean, think of the guys who didn't get extensions, you know, going back to Gordon Hayward with Utah, Kawhi Leonard with San Antonio. You know, generally that friction and tension that develops when the players who feel like they've earned a certain level don't get paid. From my experience over time, especially over the last 5 or 10 years in the NBA, that doesn't just go away, and the player and his agent tend not to forget about it.
Yeah, it's something that I was just generally shocked that, the Suns and DeAndre weren't able to come to a deal, especially because of the way he played in the playoffs and in the finals. Well, specifically the playoffs before the finals, but it should be interesting to see how all of that plays out. And Andrew is chiming in on YouTube, says, Knicks are winning tonight. My main concern is not having Nerlens Noel as a backup and Kemba defending guards like Dennis Schroeder. So we'll see how that shakes out. And after tonight's game, be sure to watch Geico Sports Night starting at 11 p.m. on SNY. There are going to be plenty of highlights and reaction after the game. Plus, Ian will join the show live from the Garden. So for the best straight-up Knicks coverage, be sure to watch Geico Sports Night tonight and every night starting at 11. And CP, you saw a lot of Quentin Grimes in Summer League. He averaged 15.3 points, 6.3 rebounds, and 3 assists per game, while almost shooting 41% from three. Sheik from Hudson Valley giving you a shout out and then asked, how do you feel about Quentin Grimes possibly being added in the rotation to guard players moving forward?
Yeah, well, shout out to Sheik, first and foremost, big fan of the show. And yeah, you know what? We got to see a lot of Quentin Grimes in the summer league. And one thing that stuck out was that although his shooting took a bit of time to catch up, he started off slow first 2 games, last couple turned it on very strong. The one thing that stuck out was that his defense was on point. He was very solid on one-on-one defense. Help defense as well, very astute, his defensive awareness to me was the one thing that really stuck out. And so, to plug him in on the perimeter, where you never know, you might have nights where RJ Barrett gets into some foul trouble or Fournier gets into some trouble. You may need to insert Quentin Grimes there. And so the defense is certainly something that I've saw in Summer League, and we got to see a little bit of that in the preseason finale as well. And then the confidence, his confidence to get in there and help his team. Doesn't look like the moment is too big for him. Obviously, he's a rookie. It's going to take him some time to get acclimated to the speed of the game, but his confidence is certainly there to help his team. Lastly, it's the 3-point shot. As you said, shot the ball 40% from 3 at University of Houston in his final year. One of 3 players to make 100 3-point shots, and he's a tough shot shooter. Finished in the 83rd percentile in the NCAA in contested shots, and also in the 60th percentile in shooting off the dribble. So the 3-point shot, shooting off the dribble, and playing some defense. I think Quentin Grimes can come in and be a nice rotational piece if his numbers cold.
And that's something the Knicks definitely needed last year in the playoffs. They didn't have, a plethora of shooters that will be able to knock down shots to get them back in the game. So if he can, acclimate to the NBA game rather quickly and the shot is there, that's going to make them a much more potent team. And Ian, I want to read this tweet from you after the final preseason game. Tom Thibodeau liked the New York lineup that closed their win versus Washington with Quentin Grimes, Derrick Rose, RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, and Julius Randle on the floor. Knicks outscored Washington by 16 in the final 7 minutes, and Thibodeau felt Grimes' defensive versatility was one key factor for the lineup. So is this something that we get used to seeing a lot?
It might be, but before I get to that, CP, I want to get into it. But did you guys hear the advanced stats that CP just threw out at us? I mean, CP, are you logged into Synergy right now? He threw out every advanced number in the book. That was impressive.
Always crunching numbers. We got to teach the fans. We got to tell them something. You
got to educate.
You got to educate.
So Chris, that lineup was intriguing to me because earlier in training camp, somebody asked Thibodeau about Obi Toppin and Randle at the 4-5, and he said didn't like how it looked last year, but maybe we'll take a look at it this year because both guys are a year advanced from where they were last year. And then you saw that lineup with Randle and Toppin at the 4-5. And Toppin really played well in that stretch. And then you talk about Grimes. You wonder if they go small again, if he chooses to go small again, Thibodeau, that is. Does Grimes then automatically become a part of that lineup? And does that impact Immanuel Quickley's minutes? I mean, these are all kind of questions that are a little bit far-fetched right now because that lineup was only out there for 7 minutes. But I think it gave Tom Thibodeau something to think about with regards to that Obi-Randle 4-5 pairing and how it could open up the floor for the Knicks.
Yeah, and a few weeks ago on Knicks Fan TV, CP, you did a deep dive into Immanuel Quickley's expectations. And Urson is asking, will IQ get minutes at the point? And if yes, how will that translate to a potential situation where Kemba and Rose miss minutes, or will, time management?
Well, I think that's a big, big part of Immanuel Quickley's development. When you look at in the summer league, it seems like that was an area of focus, was his playmaking and his passing ability. After every game of the summer league, the first person he would speak to was Tom Thibodeau, who was in his ear coaching. You couldn't make out what they were talking about, but you can tell just IQ as the playmaker, as a point guard, was really a point of emphasis in his development in the off season. So I think off the bat, you know where his strengths lie, and that is at shooting the 3-point shot. Shot the ball 38% from three last year. Really effective off the ball, playing off of Julius Randle or RJ Barrett, playing off of the dribble. We know the floater is his go-to move. He was very adept at drawing contact, both shooting and non-shooting fouls last year. So those areas were his strengths. As I said, what he needs to work on, his playmaking. And I'm curious to see how he adjusts to the new league rules, in which, you know, the referees are not going to give him those calls where he may launch into a defender or try to, you know, go up and under, maybe kick out his leg to draw contact. So how does Quickley adjust there? But I think another big area where we'd like to see him grow is if the floater's not there, is there an intermediate shot that he's comfortable with? Only shot 40% from two. Didn't really drive to the basket too much and didn't finish too well at the rim. Doesn't really seem to have a layup package that he's comfortable with at this point. So I think that's another area that he was working on in the off season. So I'm going to be interested to see how he evolves as a playmaker and as someone who can get to some better high percentage shots than the floater, because he's going to be counted on if for some reason we lose Kemba, we lose Rose for an extended period of time. Immanuel Quickley, as a point guard, as a playmaker, is going to play an important role to this team and their success.
Yeah, he's not just a surprise anymore that's coming off the bench. Now there's going to be a lot more expectations on him to finish, and as well as you said, you know, playmaking and Billy being more of a facilitator. And Ryan, you know, the Knicks drafted IQ at number 25 in the draft, and a lot of people didn't like that pick. They thought it was a bad choice. But if you had, we obviously see they were wrong. But if you had a choice, or if you could go back into the draft and redraft, where would you choose, or where would you draft Immanuel Quickley?
Boy, in the 2020 draft, I'd have to look at the whole, you know, everybody in it, Chris. But I think clearly he'd be in the lottery, maybe right around the top 10 at this point. He had a very productive rookie year. Ironically, we're talking about him right now because the guy he's playing against tonight, Peyton Pritchard, in Boston, was drafted in the same range and also really outperforms his expectations. You know, in a late first-round pick slot in a Celtics uniform. The Celtics' other second-year player in that draft, Aaron Nesmith out of Vanderbilt, got off to a slow start last year, played better as the year went on. I know Boston has high hopes for him. So I think 2020 will go down as a slightly below average draft overall. And kudos to the Knicks for getting a rotational player in the late first round. And again, if I had to, you know, off top of my head redraft that, I'm guessing he goes 10 to 14, somewhere in that range there. But I think we'll be able to tell a lot better 2-3 years from now when he has more of a body of work, because there are a lot of guys, Pritchard's one of them, who are kind of close and bunched up. Obviously at the top of the list, you have the LaMelo Balls and Tyrese Halliburtons and Anthony Edwards. Those guys have separated themselves, but I wouldn't be surprised if 2, 3, 4 years from now, you're talking about Immanuel Quickley or Peyton Pritchard or Aaron Nesmith as being a guy who should have gone in the mid to late lottery.
Yeah, and it's going to be a short week coming up for the Putback. We have another one of these live shows this Tuesday at 4 p.m. in the same places you're watching this one. We'll look ahead to that night's matchup as the Knicks host the 76ers while looking back at their first 3 games. That's Tuesday at 4. And Ian, it's probably the first time in several years that the Knicks head coach and his future are not a major storyline entering the season, as we talked about in the beginning. What's the key to Thibs getting the best out of his roster this year?
Health is such a big part of it. They were healthy last year, and Julius Randle was like an Iron Man, and so was RJ Barrett. If they can be healthy, I mean, that matters for every head coach. But I think particularly Tom Thibodeau, because he's going to rely heavily on Barrett and Randle, I'd assume, again, for heavy minutes. And then does Kemba Walker stay healthy? How does Derrick Rose do over the course of a year? Health is one of the biggest things for me. When you talk about minutes in Thibodeau, though, I thought it was interesting the other day. We're asking Tom Thibodeau about minutes and you know, the perception around him, rightly or wrongly, is that he plays guys too many minutes. But what he said was, you know, you have to look at what you have guys do in practice, the days between games, and you can rest a guy in practice. You're well aware of how much load that player has taken on in the game, and you can balance it out by what you ask him to do in practice. And Jeff Van Gundy, I thought, made a good point about minutes. He said, not all minutes are equal. I mean, if you're PJ Tucker sitting in the corner on offense and you play 30 plus minutes, it's not the same as, let's say, a Julius Randle who has the ball in his hands on offense and is active on defense for 30 plus minutes. So it's just an interesting thing to keep an eye on with Thibodeau in the minutes this year, but I really think it'll come down to health.
Yeah, and that was something that they were fortunate. They didn't have too many injuries. Obviously, Mitchell Robinson was a big one, but relatively speaking, a lot of their guys stayed healthy all year. And CP Bayside Jr. is asking you, do you think Julius Randle has another level to get to after last year? What does he have to do to get to that point?
Well, as I said, I mean, last year, the isolation shot diet was very impressive. I mean, sometimes he looked like he had Carmelo's repertoire in terms of just operating out of the elbow. I'd like to see him, number one, get to the basket a little bit more, try to draw contact and get to the free throw line, get some high percentage shots going there, because those shots aren't always going to fall. And we saw in the playoffs that Nate McMillan said, you know what, we'll roll the dice. If you want to take those shots, you can have them all day, but we'll settle for that. And so I'd like to see Julius mix it up a little bit, try to get inside, use his size, use his speed to draw some more contact. And then if the playmakers can get him involved a bit more, I think there's some potential there with, running pick and rolls with Kemba Walker, Derrick Rose, Fournier in a two-man game, even RJ in a two-man game, just to get him some high percentage shots and some shots in rhythm. I think that'll certainly help him. But, from what we saw last year, man, 24 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists. If he could duplicate that again this year, I think he's on his way.
Ryan, another big-time scorer out west, Damian Lillard, said, I think it was late last week, he said he's staying in Portland. He's sticking. He's not going anywhere. And obviously, last offseason, there were a lot of questions about his future because of some of the things that he said. He admitted that he was kind of questioning his future there. After he says that, from an executive perspective, do you kind of take that at face value, or do you continue to keep an eye on that situation? And then following up on that, where do you see the Knicks as far as having the kind of assets to get involved in that magnitude of a trade?
Yeah, I think teams around the league, Ian, are keeping an eye on two guys in particular. One's Damian Lillard, then one's Bradley Beal in Washington, who is now eligible for the extension. He has not signed that yet at the superstar level as far as players who may be available. I take it for what it's worth. I think what Damian Lillard did this offseason was put some pressure on the franchise in the short term. They made a coaching change. Terry Stotts went out. Chauncey Billups came in. Part of Damian's comments recently about being happy in Portland, I think, were the connection with Billups, and that relationship is off to a good start. However, as you know, once you're on a losing streak, if the team underperforms, a lot of those good vibes go out the window. So be interested to see in a tough Western Conference how the Blazers look, because on paper they look very similar to the teams the past couple of years. They did not make a lot of significant roster changes. But look, Lillard's been one of the most loyal superstars in the NBA. And I think he's really done a great job in embracing that, talking about, coming out of Oakland, not being heavily recruited, his loyalty to then Weber State in the Big Sky, a small conference school, and now Portland, obviously not a marquee market. So teams are monitoring it. But I don't think you can be reliant on that. Even, Philadelphia, we've heard it with Ben Simmons. They would love to get Damian Lillard to play with Joel Embiid. Well, of course they would, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I know Neil O'Shea, a longtime successful president of Portland, has no desire to trade Damian Lillard. I know this because when I was in Phoenix, I had a number of conversations with him about Damian Lillard, and he's embraced the franchise. And again, when you're in a market in the NBA that is not a marquee destination market, if you have a homegrown superstar, you do everything you can to keep him happy and retain him, because once you go into the free agent market, a player of that caliber is not walking through the door. So I think it was a good late off season for Portland, getting that reaffirmation from Dame. But now comes the hard part: winning games in the Western Conference and continuing to keep them happy with a roster that looks the same as it has in years past.
Yeah, it's easy to stay committed, during the offseason when you made a few moves with the roster, coaches. But like you said, you start losing, 5-7 game losing streak, then things can go south. But lastly, we're going to get the final thoughts from CP and Ian. One bold prediction for the 2021-22 Knicks season, good or bad?
My bold prediction.
Go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
My bold prediction for this season is that Knicks fans who were down on Obi Toppin last year are a lot happier by midseason or toward the end of the season than they were a year ago as a rookie.
Like
CP?
that one.
Hey, I like that one. I agree with Ryan on that one. I'm going with this. I'm going Derrick Rose wins the NBA Sixth Man of the Year award. I just feel like he's locked in. He's got chemistry with his teammates, had a solid preseason. I think he's going to have ample opportunity to close games for Tom Thibodeau. And, you know, it just seems like, without knowing him personally, it just seems like he's in a good mental space with this team. I mean, he got engaged on the garden floor. He won up you, Chris. You know, so he gets engaged on the garden floor. It just seems like he's in a good place mentally and on the court as well. I think he's going to have an outstanding year. And I think Derrick Rose wins the NBA Sixth Man of the Year award.
I'm going to go a little bit different, but I'm going to go, if the Knicks get back into the postseason, Julius Randle, I think, will have a stronger playoffs. And I base that opinion on the idea that Randle, after a really tough first year in New York, he got criticized. Fans were crushing him. He didn't put his tail between his legs. He went to work in the offseason. He came back an All-NBA player last year. So I think he'll do the same with the playoffs. I think the way he'll approach the playoffs will be different. He'll have learned from that experience. So if the Knicks can get another postseason berth here, I think you'll see a different Julius Randle.
And my bold prediction is going to be Kemba Walker. We're going to see some cardiac Kemba from him. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people, especially being back, you know, in his hometown. And it's going to do wonders for the Knicks franchise. But that's going to do it for season 2, episode 2 of the Putback with Ian Begley. Our thanks to Ryan McDonough for his front office perspective, Celtics perspective, and Knicks perspective. Be sure to follow him at McDNBA and check him out on Odyssey Sports. And our thanks, of course, to CP of Knicks Fan TV. Give him a follow because we can't wait for his coverage all year long. For Ian, I'm Chris. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here Tuesday at 4. Enjoy opening night.
See you, everybody.